I'm actually really excited about this topic because it's something that's come up in a lot of conversations that I've been having with user testing customers over the last couple of months, given all the changes that we're seeing in what's happening in the world right now. So just to introduce myself, I'm Lija Hogan, and I'm a customer experience consultant here at UserTesting, where essentially I help our customers to help structure and plan their research programming, and as well just projects, and also provide a lot of content and thought leadership around how to actually do usability and user needs testing. And Mark, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Leah. My name is Mark Shekoyan. I'm a senior UX researcher here at UserTesting, and I sort of play a hybrid role between helping to lead groups when it comes to the execution of both strategic and tactical UX research, and also playing a role in what's called our insights architecture side, really helping with larger, more holistic, systemic design thinking and design research initiatives that have to do with enterprise level accounts. Background is in anthropology and been in the field for about 15 years, and super happy to talk to you guys today about personas and empathy maps.
Great, awesome. And we've talked a bit about this as we prepare for this topic. And I think just for those who didn't join last week, maybe we should start the conversation just with an introduction to what our perspectives are. And Mark, I'd love to have you, go first here around what are personas and empathy maps.
Sure. So for me, personas are archetypes. They are ways in which you take a bunch of data points about a type of user and you summarize them into some portraiture or caricature that allows you to get your head around, what exactly these people are, what their key needs are, their goals are, so that you're just not dealing with the raw, blurry, sets of data as it relates to people. And they're useful because when you put them up distinctly against each other, you can sort of see the differences in the needs. If you're in a particular market space or design space and you have 3 different personas, those personas should really stand on their own as very distinct in terms of the needs and the behaviors, so that when you're designing, you're able to think about, well, then the feature set should really focus in this direction, or it should be, we should bring these things forward for these types of people versus these types of people. So it's a caricature, it's an archetype that lets you really think about the differences and the nuances of design and functionality. And the empathy maps are interesting because basically, you think about them, they're kind of a quadrant of, what the user is saying, doing, feeling, thinking. They're for me, they're a data gathering tool where, you can go into a set of interviews and make sure that you're hitting those different components. Those can be used to feed into the creation of personas. They're often a very useful artifact for you to feed that content into the creation of personas. You can also use them on the back end. Once you've created the personas, you can maybe go in and use the personas as a recruiting tool to kind of get even more nuance or more detail with the empathy map. So they can feed into the creation of personas, or they can kind of be used on the tail end. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about that. Personas as archetypes or caricatures, and empathy maps is really sort of a data gathering tool that lets you sort of focus on behavioral traits and attitudinal traits with your users.
Yeah. And I think, one of the key points, or a couple of things that I would just add, are really that it's important that you use real information about real people in order to construct both personas and empathy maps. And that means that it's really important to make sure that you've got both quantitative as well as qualitative data in order to help to fill out that picture. And, most frequently UX personas really focus on more, I think, the qualitative side, right? Somewhat informed by that quantitative data. And then, empathy maps, we were talking about this offline, can kind of go both ways. You can use them as a jumping off point for, really understanding, like getting in the heads and understanding how people are thinking, right? And then also the strategy that you brought up too.
Totally. And to kind of build off that, like, how do you see sort of qual and quant feeding in? Because we've talked about how these are very important parts of personas. How do you see them sort of coming together, or how do you kind of stitch them together in the creation of personas?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think, and this actually relates to kind of what you decide you're going to put into, like what's actually going to be on the page when you're structuring a persona, that the quantitative data can function in a couple of ways. The first one is actually to drive, like, how do you pick which personas you're actually going to focus on? Because when you're actually saying, okay, like we know 3 types of users represent 80% of our total audience. And essentially, you can leverage the demographic data that you have about those personas to essentially drive who it is you're going to invite to do the interviews in order to learn what their stories are.
Totally.
And so a really practical, I think about it in terms of like research strategy, just, you can start with the entry point of that quantitative data and just get a sense for like, who are these people, right? And then I also flip it too. Sometimes it's actually easier to start with the entry point with an entry point of who in my mind's eye do I think I want to build this thing for, whatever that is, product, service. And start to get a choice of, well, let's actually size that audience and get a sense for, are they really representative of, is this person that I'm envisioning representative of who these people are in real life?
Totally.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, those all resonate with me. And, one of the ways I like to think about it is, marketing personas and design personas are 2 different things. And it's almost like the marketing persona, you're going to have some demographic traits. You've done some sort of sizing of your market segments. And, it's a 30,000 foot view. You're kind of flying over the terrain, but you don't know what's going on in the trenches. But to even get down to the trenches, you kind of have to have some of those demographic traits to know who to talk to your point. But you're going to ask more behavioral questions. You're going to ask more questions about what are people doing? Why are they doing it? What are their needs? And then you're going to kind of take the skeleton of those demographic qualities, and you're going to somehow synthesize them with the flesh of this behavioral data. And then, you're going to look at the delta there. And then that's how you're going to start synthesizing your personas, because you got to start somewhere. Like if you have no idea what your market is, if you have no idea, maybe good to do some higher level surveying to get a sense of what some of those buckets are that you would then have to go in and maybe do more of that qualitative research to get access to those behavioral things. But ultimately, sort of that 30,000 foot view and that trench view somehow needs to be integrated in some way with a lot of thinking.
Yeah, that thinking is I think the big challenge. It's really interesting. I think, as you were speaking, I really love that metaphor of you've got the skeleton and the flesh that really helps to kind of make that whole picture. And I think one of the other themes that we saw in the questions that came up was like, what should a persona look like? And, so I thought that metaphor really played well there. So I'm curious, what, in your mind's eye, is there a perfect persona, or can it take different forms?
Gosh, I've seen so many different flavors of them, but the physical representation is kind of a nice to have. This is the person, sitting at their coffee table, whatever. But the things that I think I've often seen is usually you have a section that has some sort of scalars, like, tech savvy, not tech savvy. Those are sort of the sliding scales that let you kind of hone in on what are the traits, the behavioral traits. So if you were to put that up against 3 others, those scales should be very different, because you're getting a sense of like, this behavior is very different than that behavior. And then there's usually some narrative, that tells a little bit of a story. There's usually a section that talks about the goals, and the needs. So, something about the goals, the needs, some background description, and some scales. In terms of the visuals, like, should this person look like this or that? I mean, in the day, that's nice, but it depends on what you're building. Like if you're really building like for, a certain age bracket and a certain gender bracket, then maybe you do need to have that. But a lot of this stuff, it just depends on what you're trying to build. So yeah, the image is going to vary, I think, relative to what the product is. But the real important meat of this really is those scalars, the description, the needs and the goals, and then you would adjust the images relative to the product space that you're and the target demographic.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask a controversial follow-up there a little bit, which is, one of the key points that we brought up last week is just the difference between marketing personas and UX personas.
Yeah.
But do you think, or what are your thoughts really around the idea of pulling in some of the aspects of a marketing type persona? And I guess, what do you see as being the differences between a marketing versus a UX persona?
Yeah, this is, it's a Venn diagram, because it feeds into the recruiting piece and what I was saying earlier. So, I'm trying to think of a product, like if you're designing, a certain product for people at a certain age bracket, that maybe has to do with mobility issues or something like that. You're gonna need to have that demographic data, that behavioral. You're gonna need to have that kind of marketing data, but then you're not necessarily gonna know what are some of the challenges or the struggles people are having with their day-to-day life, or the actual kind of workarounds that they have to adapt to mobility. So you're gonna feed that behavioral trait data about, for instance, this age bracket, into this needs-based data, and those that you're going to bring them together. So like I said, it's a Venn diagram. I do not think you're just going to be able to go in ad hoc without any kind of a sense of the segment you're looking at. Some people do, but I that's why I think that you do need to really kind of think about the qual and the quant, and your market, like what is your market, and then, but you're, like I said, it's that 30,000 foot view. So you're getting down to what people are actually doing, what their pain points are, what their struggles are. Marketing personas often don't get to that nuance, and they can't drive the design changes. They're just going to talk about things at a very broad brush strokes. And so when it comes to building an application or something, they don't have that detail and that clarity to help drive the design. So bottom line is that you need both. It's a Venn diagram. The marketing personas maybe help you hone in on a little bit on where should you even look, but then you're going to need to ask very specific behavioral questions to get at the whys and the needs. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I'm totally in alignment with you on that piece. And I think, in terms of just the visuals and thinking about how do you construct that, really thinking about, do you need to all have that same view? Can you create a view that provides that marketing perspective versus the UX perspective, or should it all be together in one document so you're all looking at the same thing?
That's really an interesting question, and this kind of gets down to how you often have departmental fiefdoms within large organizations, because you'll have the marketing team, they've got their personas and they think they understand their personas, and you got the UX team, and often those folks should talk to each other more. I do think that there should be some convergence there, and some integration of those points of view, at least to say, well, this is how you're using them and this is how we're using them, and somehow we are articulated. But I have literally seen, like, this is the marketing personas and this is the UX personas.
And I would throw in product. I've run across that too, where we've got, 3 different systems going on, right? And then how do you rationalize them too? Because sometimes there's overlap, and sometimes I thought your Venn diagram metaphor was really useful there, because there are pieces that are not covered, right? When you have that going on. So thinking through, like, how do we rationalize all those systems together so that we've got this unified view of who these people are. And then I think the additional layer is just, what does their customer journey look like, and how are you serving people throughout that journey?
Totally. And this metaphor is super used in so many places, but the 4 blind men and the elephant, every person is going to have a take on the elephant, but if those 4 people talk to each other, they would have a much better perspective on the elephant. And more of that.
Yeah. Oh, it's so easy to say that, though.
Yeah, right.
So, I think one of the reasons why we started this conversation around personas and empathy maps is because actually a number of teams are kind of living what did we do with the personas that we have right now, given all the changes that we've seen. And so I wanted to ask you your thoughts around just where do you see people going? What do you see people doing with their existing personas in this new world where things have shifted?
Well, one of the things, that teams realize, I think that have done this, is that personas aren't done. Like, they're about taking the pulse on conditions, right? And some people do a refresh yearly. That's pretty good. But things change. The lay of the land changes. The need spaces changes. And obviously, in the past 4 months, the world has radically changed. We're working at home. Telehealth. This whole drive towards rapid online education. There's just so many things that have changed in the world, and people being at home with their kids while they're working. So it's like whatever the world was 6 months ago, it's different now. And so I think that a lot of people are trying to figure out, like, how is the world different, and how does that affect my personas? How does that affect my design? How do I need to start thinking about the user in a new way? And so I'm hearing a lot of people wanting to, maybe recreate some personas, maybe ask themselves these questions all over again, and start to maybe say, well, we had these for the past 3 to 4 years. That's not really, some of these elements are relevant, but others of them are not. And what can we keep? What do we need to chuck? So there's a lot of discussion around trying to get a pulse on who are our users, what are their needs, and to recreate our personas. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I'm hearing that. And I think the other challenge that people are having actually is, so, just because things changed 4 months ago doesn't mean that they haven't changed this week or last week. And how do we cope with getting these personas to be durable enough that, given another kind of like significant change that we didn't anticipate in 2 weeks, that we haven't sunk too much time and research and resources into evolving what it is that we have in terms of personas.
Yeah, it's interesting, because it reminds me a little bit of scenario planning work. I'd done some scenario planning, which is a different topic than personas, but it's almost like futurescaping. Like, what are going to be the 4? I did a project a long time ago where we were creating some online entertainment options. We tried to create 4 different future worlds because we didn't know what the world was going to be like. Literally, there was these 4 different types of people that were inhabiting them. And I think we're dealing with a lot of ambiguity now. So I'm curious if people are starting to do, like, maybe some scenario planning work along with their persona work, because we're dealing with a lot of unpredictables right now. Yeah, a lot of unknowns.
Great question. I know some of the coping mechanisms that I'm hearing about is, you can make what are called draft personas, right? It's very lightweight. It's not like fully featured, not 100% based on, comprehensive research. But, I'm almost thinking about, and I've never thought about this before, the idea of like a persona dashboard, you know what I mean? Where you actually are kind of like looking at, so kind of what are the market conditions, what's happening in the world, who's actually, if you've got something that's a live experience coming up, like what are the primary flows that you're seeing, things people doing, questions that are coming in, and having that drive that needs piece. And then also in parallel, doing essentially like touch point empathy interviews with people at regular intervals, which, so that it doesn't like take up all of your time, probably would be monthly, right? Because doing interviews all the time is exhausting. Wonderful.
Well, that's a super cool idea. If you could have a living, it's not even a document, a living presence that was digital, that you could be rapidly taking the pulse against and morphing over time. That's amazing. Yeah, that's definitely a cool idea.
Yeah. See, now I'm like, oh, I have to figure out how to do that.
Right.
So, I think, another question that I had for you actually was, so, given the idea you've created these personas, right?
Mhm.
One of the biggest challenges that we see with organizations is that they put all this effort into structuring them, but
Mm.
then they don't end up using them.
Mhm.
So, what do you think are some strategies that organizations can use to actually make those personas come to life and breathe and useful?
I mean, you've got the analog, you got the analog to digital. Like what you just said, the digital example you gave was great, but like the analog, I've seen them, printed out and put ubiquitously, on every, strategic space, in a design room, they're physically there. In the product room, they're physically there. I've even seen them in the bathrooms. It just depends on the company, but having a physical presence for them, I think, is really powerful. Having, if the executives and the product team, is invested in these, having them role play them in kickoffs, bringing them up in planning sessions, so they're not just visually there, but they're actually brought into the conversation. Having somebody take a seat at the table as Persona X, that's a really proactive design team if they're thinking that way. Bringing them, using them as prompts for brainstorming sessions. So they're, ideally you should be doing that. Here's your persona. We're going to do this set of round robin iteration against these prompts using persona X, Y, or Z. So physical placement, bringing them into the conversation, using them as prompts for ideation. Those are all things I personally experienced, but I love your digital version too.
Well, the reason why I think about the digital version is just because we aren't sitting in these spaces anymore. And so
Right,
we don't have these curated
right.
group spaces
Yeah.
that kind of promote a type of thinking. So how can we create that kind of curated space in a virtual setting that enables you to pivot quickly? And I think that's where my head is right now. And I'm like,
Yeah, I mean, if the company's really bought into these, as the thing that they're driving towards, they should almost show up in the dashboards of the intranets for these companies. It's like, we're building for X, Y, and Z, and they show up there, and you can then drill down and learn more about them, and
yeah,
all sorts of ways to get access to them.
yeah, yeah. So that's a great point. So, I think, we've got a few minutes left, and I know that there were a couple of questions that I had for you, but I think we didn't start with this, but we probably should have. But
Mm.
what's the value of a personas? Like, why personas? And especially given the fact that we're so busy right now, why now? Why should we be putting effort into them now?
Yeah, I mean, they're about empathy. They're about understanding and having a sense of who caring for it's about care and empathy. It's about caring for the people that you're putting all this time and energy into building something for, and being able to have the capacity to put yourself in their shoes in an archetypal way, so that you can understand from the inside out what it is that they need, what it is they care about, what are their challenges, what are their struggles. And I think they're very important, because we're so busy in the doing of things, we often forget the why we're doing it and for who we're doing it for. And at the end of the day, this UX, it's all about empathy. It's all about caring. You're trying to make people's lives better. Hopefully, whatever product, whatever service you're creating, hopefully it's doing something to make people's lives better. And the more you can, understand what people need and who they are, hopefully that will call the best out of you. So there's that. There's the empathy piece, and there's also just the focus piece. You can't, quote, boil the ocean. You can't be everything to everybody. You've got to be something to somebody. So this helps you kind of focus your efforts and understand, this is what we're doing here versus this. And so it's about empathy, it's about focus, and inspiration, I would say. I mean, if you can feel empathy for people, if you can focus yourselves, this hopefully then will inspire better design thinking, better solutioning, that's richer and more that lands with people, versus it comes from some sort of top-down mandate. because at the end of the day, you've generated these in a conversation with people. These have, you might have the most brilliant visionary product people in your team, but to create personas, you really need to go out and engage people. You need to have conversations with them. You need to understand them. And so it brings their voices in, and then it crystallizes them in a way that that empathy is made real for people. So I guess what was my point? Empathy, focus, and inspiration.
Yeah. There's a great question that came in. Well, a couple questions. One is, can we get a visual representation of what that Venn diagram looks like? And I think I haven't prepared one, but now I'm like, we probably should make something that actually shows that. So maybe we'll publish that in an upcoming blog. But the question that came in is caring in what way? And I think, there's a couple of ways that you can project caring. Like, one is actually like a taking care of someone, where it is that you are anticipating their needs, fulfilling them, creating experiences that are going to support people as they are trying to accomplish whatever goals that they're trying to accomplish. And, that caring piece means that, you have to kind of live with someone a little bit in order to understand, what is it that they really need? Why do they need it? How should we be executing in order to support that need? I don't know if you had any final thoughts about that.
All that. And you really, people are trying to adapt themselves to so much in the world right now. And so, by understanding, to your point, like, what are the constraints? What are the constraints they have? What are the limitations they have? One tool isn't going to work for everybody in every situation. What are they struggling with? Then, your solutioning is trying to solve those problems, is trying to make life better for them relative to those constraints and those pain points and those challenges. So the care is basically, positively intended creative problem solving as it relates to the challenges people have in whatever domain, whether it's a financial domain, online learning domain, health, whatever your domain is. Somehow somebody is in a space where they're wrestling with something, and you're trying to make something that makes that better for them. Yeah. So that's the caring, is making it better for them. Whatever you do, it shouldn't make it worse for them.
Well, hopefully that's never the case when you're making a product or an experience.
Right.
So anyway, on that note, we're going to wrap for today. And I just wanted to thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone else for joining us for this discussion. And as I noted, we're going to continue to share more content on this topic, because obviously it's one that's near and dear to a lot of people's hearts right now. And thank you so much, and have a great day.
Great. Thanks, everybody.